It is estimated by the Lancet that approximately 1 billion people globally have OSA, and that is roughly 1 in 5 adults. My younger sister, she never was diagnosed, but she went into atrial fibrillation in December of 2019, and the EMTs weren't able to get her out of it, and she passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. We need to raise awareness and have people know that there are alternatives and that they're, easy to access and available for them.
Welcome to the SheSpeaks podcast, a podcast created to elevate women's voices across diverse backgrounds on topics impacting women. I'm your host, Aliza Freud, founder and CEO of SheSpeaks. Each week, I have a conversation with a woman expert who shares her best how-to advice on a topic so we can learn how to better do that one thing from a woman who's been there and done that. Our hope is that these conversations help you feel more inspired to speak up and be heard in your own life and work. Now, on to the episode. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're all having a great week so far. So here we are, the beginning of August. Summer is just flying by, and I am really looking forward to having you hear the conversation I had for this week's episode. I am just learning about this condition that over 1 billion people globally deal with. 1 in 5 adults have what is called obstructive sleep apnea. Now, there are different severities of sleep apnea, but what we're talking about today is sleep apnea. You're going to learn more about it, why it can be extremely dangerous if you are not diagnosed. A lot of people think, oh, my spouse or whoever, my significant other, is just a bad snorer, but not realizing that there can be more behind it. And so it is a very pervasive condition that we are learning more about. They now have new options in terms of how to deal with it. It has been in the past pretty difficult if you have sleep apnea, you've been diagnosed with it, to get one of those breathing machines, which are very clunky, very disruptive to your sleep. And if you happen to also have somebody who sleeps in the same room with you, can be very disruptive to their sleep as well. So there are now some new devices and some new options. We have today on the show Laing Rikkers, and her sister passed away from sleep apnea. And it's interesting because she was working already on a device. So she now is part of a company that is now a publicly traded company, and she'd been working on this device for sleep apnea, and then it turned out that her sister had it. So what we talk about today is we learn more about sleep apnea, and Laing also is the author of a book called Morning Leaves. It's a book of poetry and art that she created after the sudden death of her sister from sleep apnea. So we'll learn more about that. And I think if you are somebody who has heard about sleep apnea but didn't know what the risks are and just how many people deal with sleep apnea, I think this will be the episode for you. So with that, we're going to jump right into it. Here we go. Laing, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you because you and I were just chatting about this, but the percentage of people who don't know when they have been diagnosed or that they have obstructive sleep apnea is a very high percentage. But let's talk about your story first. How are you connected? How did you get interested in the topic of obstructive sleep apnea?
I am working in the field. I am the co-founder of a business called Prosomnus Sleep Technologies, and we make a treatment for patients who have been diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea. It's FDA cleared, it's reimbursed by all major insurances, it's available in the US and in Europe. And it is a device that is an oral device that helps to hold the jaw open to open the airway. And so I worked with a team of people who have been in the medical device field for a long time, and we started this business in 2016.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and we took it public on NASDAQ last December. And so we're having a great time. It's going really well. But maybe it would be helpful for me to even give a little bit of background on what obstructive sleep apnea is. So it's a very common disease. It is estimated by the Lancet that approximately 1 billion people globally have OSA, and that is roughly 1 in 5 adults. And it's approximately 80% of those people are undiagnosed. The numbers are
Wow.
staggering, and it's a very serious condition. What happens to someone who has obstructive sleep apnea is when they are sleeping, the soft tissue in their throat falls back and it obstructs the airway. And so they're not able to get the oxygen, which is very dangerous, obviously, and puts a lot of strain on the cardiovascular system. So cardiovascular damage is the primary condition that sort of follows having sleep apnea, but it's also highly correlated with diabetes and cancer. And there's an increasing awareness of it in the clinical community and also in the public, but not nearly as much as is important that people are aware. So I'm spending a lot of my time trying to educate people. I think women have it less frequently than men, but are disproportionately underdiagnosed. So I think your audience, women, it's very important for women to know what the signs and symptoms are. And those are typically snoring is the number one, and daytime drowsiness. So people who need to take a nap or don't feel rested when they wake up, you often hear. People who wake up with a dry mouth, they might wake up gasping. It's also very correlated with depression and moodiness. So if people have those symptoms themselves, or often it's their bed partner that they identify the symptoms, it's important that they speak with their physician. And it requires, a diagnosis requires a sleep study. Historically, that meant going into a sleep lab, typically at the hospital, but increasingly, diagnosis is being made via home sleep testing. So, for instance, I actually just did a test myself because I wanted to ensure that I didn't have this. And I was able to do a telemedicine consultation with the ENT's office. They checked with my insurance, they got it cleared. They sent me a FedEx box that had the home sleep test in it, put something over my finger, put something on my wrist, a little patch on my chest, went to sleep, uploaded the data to the cloud via an app. And then they called me a day or two later and gave me my results. So it was very straightforward. And that's important in terms of helping to make it easy for people to get diagnosed, which is important. And then when people are diagnosed, the most common treatment for people is CPAP, which is the mask that blows air to open the airway. And it's a very effective treatment for patients who can tolerate it. Unfortunately, about 50% of people are unable to tolerate it or don't want it because of the social stigmas. There's a whole assortment of reasons that people might not want a CPAP. So that was one of the reasons that we were very passionate about getting ProSomnus off the ground, is that patients really want alternatives. And so what we like about our device is not only is it very effective and very safe and covered by insurance, it's very easy to use. It's custom made for each patient. It looks quite a bit like an Invisalign. It's a clear, call it acrylic. It has posts on the upper and lower splints that hold the jawway open at the position that the physician prescribes. And it's very straightforward. You can drink, talk, get up and go to the restroom, etc. And it's very user-friendly for patients. So that's been a great part of our business but we need to raise awareness and have people know that there are alternatives and that they're easy to access and available for them.
So how did you were involved in the design of the product? Was that part of your background?
I was more on the finance side. I work with two other fellows, Len Liptak, who is the CEO, and Sung Kim, who is the engineer and head of operations and R&D. And the three of us brought different backgrounds to the business. I had spent about 20 years in private equity helping to build medical device companies, and they both came out of the medical device field and the dental field. And most notably, they had worked together at 3M. And so we worked together on another project and identified this opportunity. And so it's been going great. We're really very pleased with it.
Yeah, let's talk about your personal connection to obstructive sleep apnea, which I'm sure has also been a motivating factor in your being involved in the work that you do now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So unfortunately, sometimes one's private and professional lives collide, and that happened to me. My younger sister had some of the symptoms that I mentioned earlier. She snored loudly and was tired all the time. She needed to take a nap pretty much every day. She had moodiness. And because of my work, I recognized the symptoms and suggested that she go get tested, and sent her the name of a local specialist that we worked with. And unfortunately, she never was diagnosed. But she went into atrial fibrillation in December of 2019, and the EMTs weren't able to get her out of it. And she passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. And I obviously was aware that she had some of the symptoms, but I don't think anyone imagined that it would be as dire as it turned out to be. Typically, OSA will reduce life expectancy. It does tend to shorten lifespan and certainly reduces the quality of life. The situation was more extreme than many, but she was only 46. She had a young family, and so it was just tragic. And part of why not only do I have an interest in it from a business perspective, but I really now am motivated by this condition is treatable. And if we can educate people and give them the resources that they need, and not every patient needs the same things. There are lots of different approaches, but to make sure that people are aware of what their options are and are taking care of themselves and their loved ones. It happened in December of 2019. Good news with that was it was pre-COVID. My whole family was able to get together and had a large service for her, and were able to be together, which was really important from the grieving standpoint. I thought a lot during COVID of the people who couldn't get together when they lost loved ones, and how particularly hard that must have been. And I was looking for a way during lockdown, which happened just a few months afterwards, to address the grief that I was still feeling. And I was looking for sort of a creative outlet. I had a little bit more time because I wasn't traveling for my work, and I just needed to channel some of the emotional baggage that I had at that point into something constructive. And I had two teenagers who were at home. I was trying to keep them optimistic and looking forward, and was managing a business that, young business at the time, and making sure that I kept the lights on and kept the business was amazing. They actually manufactured every day of COVID as a essential business, which was remarkable from that team. But I needed to take care of myself. And so one of the things that I did was I read a book called The Artist's Way, which many people might be familiar with, by Julia Cameron. And I just found it to be fantastic. And one of the things that she suggested was writing a journal every morning. She called it Morning Pages. And so I started doing that. And, that in conjunction with, I was talking to a grief counselor who was extremely helpful, and I was getting outside and walking and moving and being in nature. Those three elements are now, I think of it as walk it, talk it, write it. Like I was I needed to get it out of my body, both physically, I needed to get it out of my body in terms of writing it and talking it and being creative. And so I ended up writing a lot of poetry that was very inspired by being out in nature, which I'm lucky. I live in Southern California, and it was really beautiful. It's always really beautiful, but it was particularly beautiful during lockdown because I'm sure you remember there was so little pollution. Like the sky was so blue and it was so quiet, and without the traffic, you could walk places that normally were filled with fast-moving cars. And so I was able to really connect with nature in a way that also was really healing. So I ended up writing a book called Morning Leaves. It tells a bit about the story of what happened with my sister, and I include some resources there for people about sleep apnea, because I think, like you were saying, I think a lot of people just don't even know. They're not aware that this is something serious. They think snoring, oh, it's funny, or oh, that's what everybody does. And in fact, snoring is the sound that it makes when your airway is blocked. It's your body's way of saying there's something not right here. And it's not always sleep apnea, but it often is. And so it's certainly worth ruling it out if one snores or has someone that they love who's snoring.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question in terms of the situations, in terms of risk. So you mentioned that and I don't know if you said this right before we started, but there are a billion people globally who suffer
Mhm.
from obstructive sleep apnea. That's 1 in 5 adults. That's just a huge number.
Huge.
And your sister had, unfortunately, the worst case scenario of what can happen. What percentage of those cases, and you said 80% of these cases are not diagnosed?
It tends to be correlated with, for instance, hypertension or heart failure. In the case of my sister, she had an enlarged heart. It's a little bit hard to give the exact number, but someone with severe sleep apnea, I believe the statistic is it can take 15 years off of their life expectancy. But the person who has severe sleep apnea, so it is categorized typically into mild, moderate, and severe, and roughly about a third of the population has those categories. And yeah, it's a very serious condition. And when they did the autopsy on my sister, they found that she had an enlarged heart, which is typical of people who have OSA, because what's happening is your body's not getting the oxygen. And so your heart has to work extra hard to move the oxygen that it does have in the system around. And so it's very hard on the system. And continuing to do research and learning more and more about the impacts of not getting enough oxygen. But the research is pointing more and more to the seriousness of it and how correlated it is with other very serious conditions which are more typically what people think of as dying. My sister died of in atrial fibrillation, but it was certainly exacerbated by this.
And you mentioned before that there's a link also with diabetes and cancer. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
In
So
terms of you are more likely to develop diabetes. I'm assuming this we're talking about type 2 diabetes and cancers based on having obstructive sleep apnea.
that's what the research shows. Yes. So I don't have a lot of the statistics at my fingertips on it right now, but yes, there's definitely a high correlation of people who have both of those and OSA.
So you talked about the signs and the symptoms already. You talked about what some of those things look like. Let's say you suspect that you have sleep apnea. What is the best thing for you to do?
The best thing to do is to call their physician. They can call their primary care physician or an ENT or a pulmonologist. And I would also encourage people, if they don't get the answer that they think is appropriate, if they get brushed off, or I think with women, sometimes people think of it as a older, heavier men's disease and they ignore younger, fitter women. So I think that if you happen to have a physician who isn't as responsive, call someone else. That would be my suggestion, that it's worth following up on. I think one of the challenges is that people aren't necessarily taking even that first step. And so it is very important to reach out and see if they can at least rule it out. That's the most important thing. And it should be pretty straightforward. And a primary care doctor should have the tools available to them to do that. Also, if they need a resource, ProSomnus has a Find a Provider page on its website. That's another way that you can go in and put your zip code in and find a specialist. So if you happen to have a primary care person or somebody else who's maybe not giving you as complete an answer as you suspect you might be needing, then that's also another avenue.
Yeah. And I want to take a moment to talk a little bit too about this company that you've been involved in building. And you mentioned that you went public recently.
We did.
When was that? That, by the way, that's such an enormous accomplishment. Congratulations. It is a unicorn, right? They call these businesses, the companies that do get to that stage, unicorns. So for those listening who may not be familiar with that type of terminology, just think of what you think a unicorn, very not something that you normally see. So a big deal that you've gone public. Congratulations on that. What is the feeling of being up there when you said you went public on the NASDAQ, is that right?
We did, yeah. Oh, it was incredible. When you're running a small business, there's so much day to day, I call it in the sausage factory, all the things that you're juggling, and to really be able to pause and stop with the team and look and go, wow, we've accomplished something. And that felt great. We were able to bring some of our key customers with us to the event and a few of our family and friends. And so it was really a great experience. And NASDAQ does an extraordinary job celebrating the team and making it really special and fun. And we went outside and on the Jumbotron in Times Square, they had our names up and it was surreal, honestly. It was really great. And yeah, we were very proud to get it done. It was last fall was not an easy time to get any deals done. And so it felt particularly good. I think we had support because I think that people recognize that this is a really big need in the medical community and that patients need options and that the alternatives that are currently out there have a lot of drawbacks that are unappealing to people. And so to have something that was simple and easy and widely available. And our largest customer is the US Army. And so to have that kind of institutional support has been very helpful. And I think that gives confidence to people that the US military doesn't make these decisions lightly of vendors to work with. So that's important for us as well. So yes, it was a really exciting time and a nice tribute to the whole team that really made it happen.
And it must be also incredibly gratifying for you just too, because in a lot of ways, this is mission based. What you're doing, there is a mission to try to make sure that other people, like you have a very personal experience related to this and to ensure that this does not happen to other people. And what a brilliant idea the product is, because I have over the years known people who've had obstructive sleep apnea. I've seen that machine that can be incredibly disconcerting, I'm sure, to wear while you're trying to sleep. My understanding is that it forces air so that you breathe and you don't stop breathing in the middle of the night. And not to mention the fact that, as I recall, it can be very loud. It's not just the discomfort of having to wear it. It's also the sound. And if you have a partner that you are sleeping with next to in bed, I can only imagine that it's not just difficult to sleep for the person who has to wear it, but also the person next to them who's listening. It's unbelievable that you all have developed another alternative to that is so clearly an alternative that is probably a lot easier for people to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key, is because there's no way to cure obstructive sleep apnea. Someone who's diagnosed it needs to be in treatment for the rest of their life. And so they need a treatment option that works with their life. And those kinds of factors make a big difference in terms of getting up in the middle of the night and needing a glass of water or going to the bathroom or interrupting your bed partner's sleep, or the social stigma, people at different stages of their life who are maybe dating, or and you see that all sorts of factors that you need to have something that people will use day in, day out. We've had, I mentioned the Army earlier, we've had anecdotes of some of the soldiers who sometimes have to take cat naps and sleep where they can, when they can, even be able to get up and be in skirmishes with their devices still in. They can give orders, and I don't think anyone would choose to do that, but it's actually simple enough that they were able to do that. And so it tends to just work with people's lifestyle. And I often hear, it's so great, how come I've never heard of it? And part of it is that we've just been small. And so one of the reasons that we went public was to, get more capital into the business so that we could hire more people and so that we could get the word out. And so it's just a lot of, as you say, like the idea that I just don't want this to happen to other people's families. It was really difficult to lose somebody who you're so close to, and a young mother. And it's so unfortunate. Whatever I can do to help other people make it easier so that it doesn't happen in their family, the better.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about the book and the process of writing the book. You mentioned The Artist's Way earlier. We've talked about that book on this show. We've talked about morning pages and the value of journaling. And I'm somebody who is a late to life journaler. I definitely did not understand the value of it earlier in my life, but got a copy of The Artist's Way and read that right around when COVID started. So it was hugely valuable for me. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, you said before, the walk it, talk it, write it. Why do you think this process can be so beneficial in terms of the helping you get through those things in life?
I think there's probably two pieces of it, at least for me. One, if you write something down, you have to be clear about what's going on in your head. And so I found the process of writing and articulating it fleshed out a number of things that were swirling around inside. And in and of itself, I think that clarity and organization and reflection is extremely important. I think the other piece of it is, in my case, it turned into poetry, which I think the creative process, allowing when you're filled with a lot of emotion, in my case, it was sad, it was anger and frustration and grief and all of those kinds of emotions, but to take them, roll them around, digest them, and then be able to put it out into the world as something else and to have a little bit of control over it and to try to make it more positive and more generative. And the best thing you can do when you're hurting is to help other people. And my book, so the subtitle is Reflections on Loss, Grief, and Connection, and really was about the process of managing that loss. And I wasn't sure, was I going to want to share this? Was this something that made sense to be out in the world? And so I originally put it together mostly to share with my children. And I thought my sister had lost her life early and hadn't probably gotten a chance to share everything that she had intended with her daughter. And this was a piece and reflection of me that I thought, okay, I'll at least share that with my kids. And then as I was putting it together, I realized that there was something much more universal in the messages and that other people might benefit as well. And so I started sharing it with other friends. And that was a really great thing. It led to these kinds of conversations that were deeper and more informative. And that was the connection that I really needed. And so I didn't approach it for that end, but I was worried about being judged. I was worried about people being critical. And what happened instead was people started to share things from their own experience, and they tell me what they liked and what made them think about. And it just led to deeper layers of conversation, and that was healing. And so I would really encourage others to try it. When you do put yourself out there, the world often is, not everybody, but tends to be receptive and tends to be supportive. And so for me, it's been a really wonderful experience, and it has really helped me. And I hope that the book is a gift book. So it's really ideally for somebody to either get for themselves if they're dealing with a loss, or to give to somebody else that is going through a loss. And it has about close to 80 original paintings in the book that were done by a woman named Kelly Radding, who is just an incredible artist. She done a lot at the New York Botanical Gardens, and she's a remarkable painter. And so we worked really closely. So it's also, I think, digestible for people who are dealing with grief, because it's not too dense, it's not overwhelming, and it's not sad. It's really about, the back cover says, and in the end, my grief grew roots, took hold, and blossomed into something beautiful. And that's really the message, I think, that we can take grief. And it does provide a mirror to see ourselves a little bit differently, to check in on, are we living in the present? Are we doing everything we want to be doing? Are our priorities straight? And that's the gift, I think, that you have to take from it. And people are able to use it, enjoy it, and hope it makes a bit of a difference for other people.
Yeah. I love what you said about the value of vulnerability and being brave, and how that is very much about connecting with others, right? And that just in my own experience dealing with grief, it is one of the times where you do feel that need to connect with others, maybe to a greater extent than you might normally. And I remember hearing somebody say that grief is love with nowhere to go. And it's unbelievable when you can take that and create something from it. I love what you just read with how the book ends. So that it helped take root and it's growing something else. What a beautiful message that is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was not someone who had writing a book on a bucket list. It wasn't something I had thought I would do, but it's been a tremendous experience, and I'm very lucky to have gotten to do it.
Yeah. Laing, if people want to follow you, learn more about the book, where they can get the book, learn and hear more about your story, what is the best way for them to do that?
I have a website, which is my first and last name, langrikkers.com. And there's lots of information there, including links to Amazon and Barnes and Noble and bookshop.com. And so the book is fairly widely available. Independent bookstores are always a great resource as well. And I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. And so there's links on there as well to those. And love to connect with your followers.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I am looking forward to people hearing this episode, and we'll make sure to have some links available in the episode notes so people can check it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for listening. If you're an influencer or a brand that wants to work with us, please feel free to email us at info@shespeaks.com. Until next time.